Gospel, if you would, chapter 24, and that's what really our concentration will be tonight. So I'll let you read around it in turn, read as many verses, maybe 2 or 3 verses, and then somebody else will pick it up as well then. And we'll read down to about 33, I think. So Jesus departed from the temple. Let somebody start off with that.
Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone will be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now as he was sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will the sign of your coming and the end of the age be?" Verse 4.
And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Verse 7.
For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in place after place. All this is but the beginning, the early pains of the birth pains, of the intolerable anguish. Then they will hand you over to suffer affliction and tribulation, and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Verse 10.
At that time many will turn away from the faith, and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved.
Yeah.
Verse 14.
And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. And then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his clothes. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequalled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equalled again. Verse 22.
And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There," do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, "Look, he's in the desert," do not go out. Or, "Look, he's in the inner rooms," do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
From the fig tree, learn this lesson. As soon as its young shoots become soft and tender, and it puts forth its leaves, you know of a surety that summer is near. So when you see these signs all taken together, coming to pass, you may know of a surety that he is near, even at the very doors. Truly I tell you, this generation, the whole multitude of people living at the same time in a definite given period, will not pass away till all these things be things taken together, together that will take place. Well, thank you for that, for your reading. Right, so we come now then to the last session of this series, but we haven't finished with the Jews altogether, because we'll begin next term with future Israel. We have to cover that, because that leads us on then to the book of Revelation and the revelations and dreams of Daniel, and then the history of nations, the rise of Europe, the rise and the fall of Antichrist, the Great Tribulation, etc., and then the coming of Christ. Not in that particular order, but that's the gist of what we'll be looking at in order to bring these studies to its conclusion. So what I said last week was we'd see what Jesus had to say about the Jews being back in their own land. The disciples asked Jesus, well, you'll notice the verses that Simon read to us, you'll notice that the disciples asked Jesus two very important questions on the back of Jesus saying about the temple being razed to the ground. There won't be one stone left on top of the other. These are the questions. What will the sign be of your coming? That's the first question. The second one is, what will be the sign of the end of the age? Closely connected together, aren't they?
Yeah.
But there's a strong inference that Christ, when he did say about his return, he didn't point to a definite time, he pointed to a general time.
Yeah.
I want to say this though, Jesus tonight, as we sit in here, he is ready and prepared to come. And it just takes him to get up and come, as it were. He's ready. And somebody said that he didn't know. Well, there's a sense in which he doesn't, because he chooses not to know. What Jesus is watching for is the right time. And so when they were asked the question, Jesus said, "You know not the day or the hour, only the Father knows." There was no specific time in his mind. But we know that Jesus is not just a teacher, he's not just the Saviour, and I thank God he is a prophet. And we have his prophetic ministry here. And so this is the inference that it's a general time he's talking about. And so after looking at the various signs in the previous studies that we've looked at, leading up to the Jewish peoples being in the land of Palestine as a nation, just before the time of Christ's return, Jesus makes this statement: "Those in Judea flee to the mountains. Pray that your flight be not on the Sabbath day." There are two things that stand out. Number one, we see here from the mouth of Jesus that the Jewish ancient religion, their tradition, has been restored. Pray that it's not on the Sabbath day. And that's in context also with Israel's final battle, which you find in what you've just read out of Matthew 24, verses 15 and 28. Let them flee to the mountains. If they happened to flee to the mountains on the Sabbath day, it would hinder their escape from the predicted armies that God said would come against Jerusalem. with a war, a battle that will trigger the Great Tribulation. We're going to look at that in a separate issue next time. The Jews thought it unlawful, didn't they, to walk more than 2,000 paces on the Sabbath day, which is about 2 miles. So that's the first thing. We know that the Jews are back, that the temple is there, and that the religious traditions of the Jews are there also. They've got back into their own religion and tradition. So that's one thing. Let's look at Luke 19 now. Let's look at Luke. Chapter 19, verses 43 to 44. Why are you looking for that? I'm going to read from Luke 19, verses 43 to 44. Jesus said, "For the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you and close you in on every side, and level you to the ground, and they will not leave you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation." And then Luke 22, verse 21, verse 22 to 24. "These are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them which are with child, and to them which give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edges of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Now when we look at some of the scriptures out of Matthew, and we read this, it would look as if it's all one and the same, but it isn't. What St. Luke's Gospel 19 and 21 is talking about are the days, is AD 70. When Titus destroyed the temple and scattered the Jews and drove them out of the Holy Land, and they were scattered throughout the earth. Because that was a punishment, because the Gentiles, because the Jews did not know the time of their visitation. In other words, they rejected Jesus in his first advent. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So we don't have to get that mixed up with what we're going to read now. From Matthew 24, verses 15 to 28. We see here now, not only is the tradition restored in our day, but the temple is built, the third temple. "When you therefore see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place." He's speaking about the temple in Jerusalem. The third temple, as we call it, because the second one was destroyed in AD 70. There's no temple there at the moment, but Jesus is prophesying that there will be. The Jewish religion will be restored, and so will the temple be. Well, whatever we think how important it is neither here nor there. Jesus is telling us that this is going to happen. Before I go any further, any questions?
No, I don't think so.
That okay? Right. It mentions here, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. These that we are living in today are the times of the Gentiles. They began, some believe, in 600 BC with Nebuchadnezzar, but more so we see it in AD 70, when the city was taken, and verse 24 literally fulfilled. This is not to be confused with Matthew 24, 15 to 28, and Mark 13, 14 to 26. It's in your notes. Yet to be fulfilled, which will be the final battle. the battle in AD 70 was not the final battle. The Jews are back in Palestine, in the Holy Land, but there's going to be another battle. It will be called the Armageddon, and we will have a look at that in more detail next time when we look at the future of Israel. We read that the city will be taken, but delivered by the glorious appearing of the Lord. And so after giving such a sobering prophecy, Jesus looked still further to the future and described the conditions which will prevail at his coming. He has put the Jew back in the land as a nation, and it is in this context that Jesus predicts an extremely important time. What is that time clue? We find it in verses 32 and 33. If somebody would like to read that.
Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. You also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors.
Lovely, thank you, Simon. So the fig tree is the clue. Of course, we know that, as I've mentioned before, that the fig tree is symbolic, one of the trees that are symbolic of the Jews. And so, when the leaves are being put forth, let me read it, the budding fig tree. When the signs given begin to multiply, it's like the certainty of leaves growing on a fig tree. The most important sign in Matthew has to be the restoration of the Jews to the land and the rebirth of the state of Israel. Most of the other signs previously given, which we've looked at down the weeks and months, are events that have always been. The difference being they're gaining momentum. Even the figure of speech, fig tree, has a historical message, as it is the national symbol of Israel, still is today. When Jewish people, after 2,000 years of exile, under relentless persecution, became a nation again on the 14th of May 1948, the fig tree put forth its leaves. And we remember in Mark 11, 12 and 14 that Jesus cursed a fruitless fig tree. But now the fig tree is beginning to bear fruit. And he said, never again bear fruit. But I mean, of course, we see it now. Jesus said it. When you see it bringing forth its leaves, it's going to bear fruit. And it's just like the signs that are being fulfilled that Jesus said. Jesus indicated that he was at the very doors, ready to return. And he said these words, truly, a bit confused, people get confused over this, truly I say unto you that this generation shall not pass away until these things shall take place. People have asked me, well, what does it mean, the generation that are living at the time of Christ's return, and also the gaining even more momentum as we get nearer to the coming of Christ. Has anybody heard of Bill McGee?
No.
He wrote a book called Orbit to Ashes. Orbit of Ashes. Let me read a quote. On May the 14th, 1948, the wandering Jew became a nation again. The fig tree bloomed into life again. The once withered Israel is again the centre of world action. Jerusalem, the Jews' holy city, was under Gentile control from AD 70. And in June 1967, this little nation took on the combined powers of the surrounding Arab nations. 100 hours later, the Jews controlled all Jerusalem, the ancient capital. So God promised to bring his people back in the latter years, and so he has. Although they haven't repented as a nation yet, and so God's help and leadership, they're back in their land. Nobody's going to move them. That's where God will deal with them supernaturally as a people, which we're going to look at some of these wonderful scriptures in Zechariah. And so they're back. God promised to bring them back in the latter years. Tremendous. For 2,000 years, God has been dealing with the church. The nearer we get to the second advent, we shall see him dealing with Israel. The victory is budding. The dead bones are coming to life.
Yeah.
They're coming together, bone of his bone. Israel is the pointer of God's world clock. That's where we need to keep our eye. And it's already pointing to midnight. The inhabitants of Israel are now in the millions. And there's many continually going back. And thank God for every Christian in that land that has taken the gospel of Christ.
Yeah.
We need to pray for them. Jesus said in Matthew 24:42, and I'll close with this, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming.